Hey guys, it's Historically Jules, and I'm Julie here with another banger. Today we are going to go over the Great Depression and its impact socially and economically from 1918 through 1945 in the United States specifically. So, prior to the Great Depression, we all know that World War I took place from 1914 to 1918. During this war, everybody and they mama was involved. So,
Wow!
this includes civilians, women, and even children. World War I had an insane social impact that was way beyond just the battlefield. Many people lost their families and loved ones, which led to widespread trauma and grief. Because I don't think anyone's going to be happy, dying. I don't know, just me. We know that men were the only ones who traditionally went to war and were drafted, so the women had to take a stand and enter the workforce, which challenged the traditional gender roles. World War I was one of the more pricey wars, you could say. This war needed so many resources, like money for mobilization and weapons to equip soldiers with. And because of these costly needs, many countries, like the United States, had an economic plummet due to the amount of debt accumulated after the war. The reason for these insane deaths was because of new warfare like tanks, airplanes, and machine guns. Because all this stuff was pretty new, so they wanted in on it.
Wow!
But after, another majority money-breaker was the reconstruction and reparations after the war. The aftermath of the war was so bad because of trenches and destroyed buildings and cities that the U.S. and other countries required significant investments in reconstruction. The period 1918 through 1945 is important to the Great Depression's impact because it shows us where the First World War ended all the way through the Great Depression era with, little extra crumbs of time, of course. So before we get into what Julie has researched, why don't we take a little look at what other people have researched and published about the economic and social effects of the Great Depression? First, we have a book called Global Impact of the Great Depression by Dietmar Ruthermond. This source tells us that the impact of the Great Depression overall had changed the way of business and stabbed it. This source also includes money and its significance. It says, and I quote, "Money was a medium that was supposed to be unable to change prior to the Depression, but once credit had been suddenly contracted, prices fell at such a heavy extent that supply and demand laws became irrelevant." Wow, this book was pretty helpful in telling us money and how it was affected due to the Depression.
Wow!
Okay. Our next book we're going to have a look at is called The Great Depression by Lionel Robbins. This source includes the effects that the Great Depression brought to global trade, and this book also shows us that international trade had declined sharply, which caused an economic downturn. The book also specifically shows us about currency devaluations, where countries like Germany and the United States had abandoned money value and inflation. What? These two books show us how the significant money was and how the majority of studies and books about the Great Depression are mainly about the economy, which is fitting because the economy did crash. But none of these books really tell us about the social effects of the Great Depression. It's a good thing that I'm here because that's just about what we're going to jump into after we take a look at the economics. Okay, so boom. We know that former President Franklin D. Roosevelt had created many programs and reforms to help try and pull people out of poverty and unemployment. Woo! These New Deal programs were created with the goal of relief and recovery for those affected by the Great Depression, which, if you didn't know, was kind of sort of everyone. But Julie here, we're going to dive a little more specific into what these were and how they helped. So, let's get started. So, the Civilian Conservation Corps, aka CCC, provided jobs for men in infrastructure projects. This also helped clean up and fix up the place after war. We also have the Social Security Act, which provides financial assistance to the elderly, unemployed, and those who are disabled. There are other reforms and programs like the Works Progress Administration, National Youth Administration, and the Federal Emergency Relief Administration. We also have the Securities and Exchange Commission, but the two that I mentioned prior are the most significant in providing to those who suffered unemployment and poverty. The impact these programs had on helping the economy and helping people were happy. Because, first of all, the programs like CCC, WPA, and CWA provided jobs and income for these broke people who had no source of money to live off of. Everyone was like poor. Second of all, these programs significantly improved living conditions. The Federal Emergency Relief Administration and the Resettlement Administration helped families with housing, food, and even health care. For the economy, these programs had basically made little nets of safety for the society. Programs like Social Security and unemployment insurance made a safe net for Americans to help reduce poverty. The most important economic impact these programs had was stimulating the broken economy. New Deal programs injected billions of buckaroonies into the economy, making jobs and helping economic growth. Similar to Marxist ideologies, another form of ideas had emerged due to the Depression, which is called monetarism, which basically was introduced to the United States as well as the UK, but they're irrelevant to this episode. We're only focusing on the United States. Anyways, monetarism is basically the theory of controlling the supply of money as the chief method of stabilizing the economy. And mind you, this held a very dominant role in the steadiness of money in the field of economics. But overall, the New Deal programs and monetarism significantly helped alleviate suffering during the Great Depression by reforming the financial system and offering jobs and overall helping people. Okay, now that we have gone over the economic impact of the Great Depression and its outcomes, let's look over at the social impact and changes that the Great Depression had brought. So, as unemployment literally soared over America, kind of like a blanket, and the plummeting income sources and families struggling to put food on the table and make ends meet, with everybody being unable to afford their dinner, hunger and homelessness became more common than not. The Depression also had a devastating impact on the structure of families, as men felt sort of emasculated by their inability to provide for their families, which is crazy, mind you. But with this emasculinity and feeling so worthless, it led to crazy divorce rates and, shocker, wife beating, domestic abuse. During this time, 1 in every 4 Americans was unemployed. So that's 1, 2, 3, I have a job. Crazy. Yikes. Additionally, the Depression had worsened pre-existing social inequalities. We know racism was a major thing. With African Americans and other minorities struggling, they had faced even higher unemployment rates and poverty rates because people felt whites needed jobs and opportunities more. Even during a period of depression, social inequalities had still had their place there and were heavy. But ironically, on top of that, this period of depression was also a time where many Americans began to think more Marxist ideas, and try and participate in movements for a more humane society. This decade also brought out culture and personality in people, as shown through writers and artists and intellectuals.
Wow!
But despite these personality outbrings during the Depression, it also brought out the social classes and separated people socially. For example, women's role in society had shifted as they entered workforce in greater numbers to try and support their families. But despite separating people by class, the Depression had in some places created a sense of community, as so many people, they came together and supported each other through this time of hardship. But eventually they did relieve themselves of depression and brokenness. Whew, wow. That was kind of a lot we just went over.
Wow!
I think it's time we wrap up this episode and we take everything and throw it up and away. So, in conclusion, the Great Depression in the United States from 1918 through 1945 had an insane, long-lasting, very long-lasting impact on the economy and social structure of the United States. This crisis was actually worldwide, and it spread widespread poverty, unemployment, homelessness, and social inequalities. But even though the Depression ruined many families, it also brought a sense of community, as they brought people together and fostered a sense of solidarity, including a step forward for women as they entered workforce, because as we know, they were kind of lower on the social hierarchy. So, economically, the Great Depression led to a shift in the role of government as New Deal programs and social safety nets were implemented. So, the aftermath of this depression saw the United States economy recover and grow, driven by the government's spendings and mobilization, which was used later for World War II. But ultimately, to answer our question of how did the Great Depression impact the United States economically and socially from 1918 to 1945, is that it laid a sort of foundation or groundwork for the country's emergence as a global superpower in the decades that followed it. That's it for today, guys. Thanks for listening. Historically, Jules is signing off. Peace.